Hi, I'm David Tooney, the IB senior English teacher at Spring Lake High School. When the IB canceled their May tests due to the pandemic, I started rethinking the final weeks for my students. Knowing that reading, writing, and speaking are the cornerstones of any English class, I asked my students to read a book on their potential college or university reading list and then connect those books to new ideas, culture, family, and their own lives. This is what they created.
Hi, my name is Julia Byte. I'm going to be attending Michigan State University next year, and I'm going to be talking about the book 10th of September by George Saunders. Originally I chose it just because it seemed the most interesting out of the reading list that Emily Stefke sent to Mr. Tooney. But as I read the description of the book before I bought it, and as I started reading the book, I enjoyed it more and more than I thought I would. It's basically a collection of short stories, each one dealing with a different societal problem that Saunders believes is present in our society and his different ideas about humanity. And I myself really like it because I really like when authors inject a little part of themselves into their writing and you can see it show, such as his fears or his hopes for society and his fears about humanity, such as in his stories, he'll write about artificial love. He wrote about a man who was being used as a lab rat. These stories are all fiction. He wrote about a man being used as a lab rat and being made to feel different emotions, such as love or hate for someone. And I just found it super interesting how Saunders could think of something like that and how that was one of his fears, that society could force us to feel one way about someone and then immediately change it, and a few minutes later we feel a complete different way. And I find that super interesting because I I like when books reflect a deeper view about society, and that's something that I worry about too, or not necessarily worry about, but it's just something that's kind of present, that society influences so much of what we do and how we can treat people, how we view people, how we feel about people. So just as a person in general, it was impactful to be able to read about someone who felt this way, and or to read the stories of someone who felt this way enough so that he wrote an entire collection of short stories on it. In a way, the book was pretty insightful because it kind of teaches you to keep an open perspective on things, and to not be influenced by just society, but also to generate your own ideas about things. And I would definitely recommend it to anyone. So if you're looking for a good book or just a collection of short stories that you can pick up whenever, 10th of December by George Saunders is definitely a good choice.
Hello, my name is Madison Ball. I plan on attending Michigan State University this fall, and the book I read was Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Um, a lesson that I had picked up from this book is that some part of your history or your background will affect your decisions or yourself in the future. For example, this connected to me in the way that I grew up in a very close knit family, and we always wanted to put ourselves out there to help others, and we really care about other people in the sense that we would do anything for anyone who needed it. My family, my mother and my grandmother both work with special education children, and I have really grown in the sense of myself being put in that category. I've been helping special education children for the past 3 years, and now have decided to go to college to do to major in special education. So a part of my past is that I love helping people. I love reaching out. I love using myself and my skills to help other people. And throughout the book, um, the man who is writing to his son, he talks about his life experiences growing up and how they have led him to where he is now.
My name's Michaela Minar, and in the fall, I'm planning to attend St. Mary's College of Notre Dame in Notre Dame, Indiana. So, a book that I was recommended to read as I'm becoming an incoming freshman for college next year was The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. Basically, what the book is about a 16-year-old African American girl named Star Carter and her struggles going between her home life, which is her neighborhood, which is more of a black area, and her school life, which her parents put her in a white, very prestigious school because there were so many differences in cultures. So reading the book as a senior in high school, I think that's who the audience is of this book, is seniors in high school or high school students or teenagers who are of the same age as the main character Star. Because I think they can connect more with this book, especially with the topic of racial issues, police brutality, and trying to figure out where you fit in as a high school student. So when I read this book, I noticed immediately that I could connect to it and the fact that you have to embrace who you are and where you come from. I know that a lot of my friends have struggled with things like that, friends from different cultures, friends who are minorities, things along that, friends even who are academically really smart or very challenged. I understand they feel like minorities. So I think a lot of this book is talking about what it's like to be a minority and the power that can come from embracing who you really are and embracing all of the values that you have and not being afraid to share those with other people, which, like I said, is a big issue for high school students because I feel like there's a lot of pressure in high school to either fit in with your peers, with your family life, like your social class, and I think there's a big issue that comes with that. So reading this book at this age was really powerful in the fact that it can help us all to learn that our differences are what make us who we are, and there's something we should embrace and not we shouldn't be scared to conform to what other people want us to be. We should embrace what we have and use it to our advantage.
I am Blake Kelsey. I am attending Kalamazoo College this coming fall. I read Spaceman of Bohemia. It was recommended by K College to read over the summer last year, and I'm going to have to read another one of their books this summer. So that'll be exciting. And so Spaceman of Bohemia is really about a man who has to go a long distance to a far off place and study this thing called a Chopra cloud, or it's got a bunch of antimatter. That's where the science fiction part of the book comes into play, where they're trying to just make this new discovery. But the background is it's based on really 1990 Soviet Union, the fall of the Soviet Union in Czechoslovakia or Czech Republic now, and it's about it's about mainly the main character Jacob, who goes off into space to go make this new discovery to bring pride to his nation, his new developed nation, which brings a lot of ethical questions because the man loses a lot of things that are near and dear to him, like his family, his loved ones. They all leave him. He is mentally unstable because he eventually loses his mind in isolation after a year of space travel all by himself. He starts talking to imaginary characters and figures and all that stuff. In the process, he becomes paranoid. He has people spy on his girlfriend, and eventually he loses them all. It brings a lot of another ethical question of to what extent is like the value, the pride of your country more important than your own personal endeavors and your challenges that you have to overcome as with relationships and family. It brings into question it also like why do we what choices do we make as a society to push for risking our own bodies and minds for the good of a nation. Also, it brings into question social developing, being raised in the Soviet Union, and it really opens your eyes to a different perspective of how people behind the Iron Curtain were affected at the time by this great problem. Overall, it just really teaches me personally to understand where people are coming from in a different perspective, understanding that where people are raised can affect what they think and how they think and what's going to change their mind. Also, just really being able to evaluate your risks as you go into your own personal limits and boundaries as you cross them. It's just overall a really good book for checking yourself and evaluating where you've come as a person and evaluate where other people are coming from in a different context. Thank you. Bye.
My name is Francesca Freefelt, and I plan on attending Northern Michigan University, which is in the UP, where I plan on studying wildlife biology. Go Wildcats! The book I am reading is Bury the Lead by David Rosenfeld. The main character's name is Andy Carpenter, who owns a dog rescue. This is what originally caught my eye, but it's about a murder mystery. I want to go into wildlife rehabilitation, so when I read that Andy has a dog rescue, I was intrigued since my aspirations regarding animals is similar to mine. To make things even better, on the cover of the mystery novel, there are cute golden retriever puppies. I enjoy mystery books even more if there's murder involved, since the stakes are higher if the mystery isn't solved. This book provides a glimpse into how law works, since Andy and his wife are trying to prove an innocent, believed to be guilty man's life. The suspense the author weaves throughout the novel can also be found during the COVID-19 pandemic, where this is stressful for everyone involved, especially this year's seniors.
Hi, my name is Lauren Hewitt, and I will be attending the University of Michigan this fall, specifically at the School of Nursing. So, a book that is commonly required for class there is the book titled Arc of Justice by Kevin Boyle, and this is a biography written about a young black man named Ossian Sweet. It really portrays his struggles in pursuing his dream of becoming a doctor as a young black man in the early 1900s during times of great racial prejudice. It also gives a glimpse of the hardships that his parents endured in order for him to have a chance at becoming a doctor. So I chose this book because I believe history is really important and there's a lot to be learned from the past. But also, knowing history and knowing about the past can allow you to gain a sense of perspective. So, for me, in my field of study, as I someday become a nurse of sorts, knowing about the histories of different cultures and ethnicities and their backgrounds can be very useful and very helpful in the ways that I care and tend to my patients, as well as just my little interactions with different patients. So it's very important to me to be informed. So yeah, but this book was really eye-opening to me on the terrible, terrible things that the black community went through, and just how unfair it was, but it showed how strong they were together and how they persevered and came out the other end even stronger. But a takeaway from this book would just be, don't judge other people based on what they look like, and skin color doesn't matter. Treat people the same, and as cliche as it sounds, just treat others the way that you'd want to be treated, and just always remember to be kind to other people.
I'm Jack Llewellyn, and I'm going to be attending Michigan State University in the fall. And the book I decided to read is called #Republic, Divide and Democracy in the Age of Social Media, which will be assigned in a future class I'll be taking. It was written by Cass Sunstein, and the main fascinating topic that the book brought up was that our environment creates our opinions rather than ourselves. It's the points of view we surround ourselves with, and the subjects we learn about influences our own cognition and our personal opinions, which I thought was crazy because we think of our opinions as being very personal and like part of our identity, when in like actuality it's like a product of all the things that we're taking in. Um, the book also covered topics that um, like furthers democracy based on like sources that we take in. Uh, he argues that we should be exposed to multiple points of view and limit like the amount of control we have over what we see. Uh, Not saying that we can't control what we see, but rather we can't control not seeing some things, so we're exposed to a wide array of opinions, um, so we can not be polarized towards one specific idea and rather have a more open mindset, which he argues furthers democracy. I thought that was the most important thing the book covered because it affects our thinking and the effectiveness of our democracy. But the craziest thing that the book talked about was how our personal beliefs aren't really personal and it's actually a product of our environment.
I read The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. It's a powerful coming of age novel that highlights the differences in maturity between adults and children. At first, the protagonist, Tom Sawyer, is immature, and that is shown in his relationship with a new girl in town. He's described to show off a lot to try and get her attention. Um, and then when he's rejected in that relationship, he runs off with some of his friends to be a pirate, and he selfishly lets his family worry about him because he is curious about how much they will miss him. That also displays his childhood vulnerability as well as that of the other two boys that accompanied him, Huckleberry Finn and Joe Harper. And then the boys appear again at their own funeral, and the adults are pretty immature through the whole situation because Aunt Polly and Mrs. Harper, who are Tom Sawyer and Joe Harper's caretakers, regret all the punishments that they've ever given to their boys. And then when they reappear at their own funeral, the pastor exclaims that it's a miracle that they've returned. And then later on, Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn team up to try and solve a crime, which is really interesting because they are very different. And that kind of taught me that even though people may be different on the outside and come from different backgrounds, in certain situations, people aren't so different after all. And Tom Sawyer becomes more mature in that situation because even though he's afraid of admitting what he saw at the crime scene, he eventually does. And he's known as a hero for that because he overcame his fear to do the right thing. And then at the end of the novel, the author reminds us that it is an adventure novel by having the two boys team up again for a treasure hunt of sorts, and they get the whole town involved, and it still connects back to the crime that the boys had witnessed. And yeah, I learned a lot about maturity, as I mentioned, and about how adventures don't have to become more scarce when one becomes more mature.
Hi, I'm Rachel McMartin, and I will be attending Indiana Wesleyan University in the fall. A book that they recommended for me to read was Hamlet by William Shakespeare. So this play was really eye-opening for me because it discusses a lot of human struggles that can consume people if they're not careful. So these are struggles like revenge, madness, love or lack of, grief, and betrayal, which are then told through a theatrical lens of the play. So Shakespeare uses his storytelling skills to dramatize these characteristics and warn the readers what could happen to them or their loved ones if they submit to these traits and allow them to take them over. So the protagonist, Hamlet, wrestles with these ideas throughout the play until they ultimately consume him. He's no longer the person he once was, And we can get a clear visual of that through his interactions with his loved ones, and just how the other characters talk about him and view him. So in my own life, I've seen people struggle through one or more of these characteristics to the point where they're almost unrecognizable. So Shakespeare warns us to be cautious and aware of these natural human characteristics by taking care of them in healthy ways rather than submitting to them and allowing them to overtake our lives like it overtook Hamlet's. Hamlet ends, it's a tragedy, so it ends terribly, and so Shakespeare uses this as like a forewarning and telling us to be cautious and watch how we respond to the struggles that humans inevitably face so that we don't end up like Hamlet.
My name is Josh Britton, and in the fall of 2020, I plan on attending Grand Valley State University's Honor College. So the book that I decided to read was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, and it was initially written in 1817, published early 1818 when Mary Shelley was just 18 years old. The book itself falls under the genre of gothic fiction or science fiction and romanticizes a relationship in a family and between a scientist, Victor Frankenstein, and the monster he created, Frankenstein. So the book was written when Mary Shelley was just 18 years old, and she wrote it initially in order to enter into a ghost storytelling competition, not knowing the great impact that it would have in the future. I do what I do because I enjoy it, and I want to better the lives of those I interact with in my own life. But I don't really know the positive impact that the things I do now could possibly have in the future, or the future things that I do even further in the future. I do what I do because I enjoy them. So the fact that she faced those challenges back in the day, the backlash of the ideas in her book, because the monster murdered a lot of people, and that was kind of frowned upon. And she was a woman writing the book, which also was kind of not unnecessary. It was uncommon because it was 1817 and they didn't have the same rights that they do now. So a lot of people frowned upon her just for that itself. Not even much less, within the contents within the book. So it kind of gives me hope that she was 18 years old and faced more challenges than I do now, and she was still able to have such a great impact, selling many millions of copies of her book, having movies written about it, plays written about it, there are jokes about it, TV specials, anything like that. So the things that I do now hopefully will have not exactly that big of an impact. Of course, it'd be great if they do, but I just do what I do now in order to better the lives of those around me and my own life. And I do it because I enjoy it. Just like she enjoyed writing, she decided to pursue it. I plan on pursuing medicine because I enjoy all the things within it, and I want to better the lives of those people that I interact with.
Hello, my name is Elise Zander. I'll be attending the University of Michigan this fall, and I chose to read Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. When everyone in our class was told to pick a book that would help us prepare for college, Oliver Twist was the first novel that came to mind, partly because reading it is something I've been putting off. I've been meaning to read it for so long now, but whenever the time came to select a choice book for class, I always pick more contemporary narratives, so I thought it might help me exit my comfort zone in terms of familiar literature to read this book. This book was also a good choice because we're told as students that there are several classic books we just have to read, and Oliver Twist is definitely one of them. I don't think I understood the importance of appreciating classic texts really until I started this one. The themes that Charles Dickens presents in his writing are timeless, and as a student, I read this book observing how stories of the lower class are narrated to expose the wealthy to some extent in being content with corrupt government support systems. This made me curious about 19th century London as a whole and why class structure was so rigid during this time period, but I also began to make comparisons between these themes and observations about modern society, such as income differences between groups of the current social hierarchy. Reading this book has helped me realize that we can draw more similarities from the past than differences. However, thinking in more broad terms, the plot of this book boils down to a discussion of morality. In such changing times, discussions like these are the ones we must have in order to grow as learners. The debate of good versus evil is one that is constantly evolving, but its presence alone cannot be questioned. These are the critical ideas that we have to reflect on.
Hello, my name is Kevin Losey. Next year I will be attending Brown University. I plan on majoring in pre-med. Also, I will be going into sports medicine, and I will be on the swim team. I read the book The Power of Habits by Charles Duhigg. I hope I'm saying his name right. And that book was super important to me, as I know habits are in everyone's lives. They play a crucial role in your everyday life and can affect others. Your own habits can affect other people. The book, right off the bat, starts with scientifically explaining how habits are formed, how they're destroyed, and what research led into learning about these habits. And that was very interesting to me right off the bat, because I want to know how to improve my life, of course, and improve everyone else's lives around me. And habits are super important, in the United States, in this country especially, overeating is a very bad problem, and obesity is a huge problem. If that is a habit for people to consume too much food at dinner or any meal, that's a habit, and this book can help people solve that, solve obesity. For me, this book really connected from an athletics point of view. I've been athletic in sports and just tried to be active throughout my whole life, and that takes habits. It's a habit to get up in the morning, get up early, and lift or swim or run or bike or anything. That's a habit. You need to be able to get into a rhythm and do that consistently every day. And so reading this book, I can now fully comprehend how habits are created and what I can do to really better myself as a person, and also help others if they're struggling with learning, trying to run every day or trying to swim every day, or simple things like not biting your fingernails, or reading a book, or eating, or really anything. Productivity. You got to get in the habit of being in the same room and doing the same thing every day, so that becomes a habit, and then you can be efficient at work or really anything. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sophia Castagna, and I did the book Educated by Tara Westover. This book is a memoir involving a story about a girl who was born in a survivalist mountain town in the mountains of Colorado, and she ends up escaping this lifestyle to pursue a formal education. This is very interesting because I've heard many stories in the past about people who do things like this when they escape certain religious groups or cult groups, and the difficulty comes from leaving not only their comfort zone but leaving their family, because in these types of groups it's very looked down upon to leave the setting, and they will shun you. They won't talk to you anymore. Yeah. So also another lesson that we learn from this book is that anything is possible. If Tara can leave her family in order to pursue a normal education, anyone can pursue a normal education. Most people in my town have their families behind them. Most people in regular family settings have their families behind them, at least somewhat. But Tara had to completely leave her family. So in our case, we have it easier than her, and therefore should be able to do it, since some people think pursuing a formal education is very difficult when they have to leave to go out of state, or they have to pay for it themselves, or they have to just leave what they used to know behind. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Muskan Multani. I'm a current senior at Spring Lake High School, and I'm in an IB English class where we were asked to find a book that we might encounter in college and read it and see what we can learn from it. And the book I chose was Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. So this is a nonfiction novel about a man's life as an African American, and he writes it from the perspective of a father writing a letter to his teenage son. And throughout the book we see that being a Black American comes with many hardships that never seem to fully dissipate no matter what progress is made with time, and this is really frustrating for the author, but he learns a lot from it. And we can see that the author's life is guided by fear a lot of the time, and he understands that even though he's simultaneously living with white Americans, they live in two separate worlds, and it's hard for them to understand each other. But then that got me thinking, everyone experiences fear, And even though we aren't necessarily fearful of the same things, we have all maybe been fearful of our identities at one point or another. So why is it so hard to experience empathy for other people when we're all experiencing some fear or another? And I think the narrator experienced this shift in perspective when he encountered non-heterosexual Black Americans at Howard University, where he studied. And surely these people felt fearful of their identities at one point in their lives. They probably felt unsafe. But then in the book, they're very confident in who they are, and they're unapologetically themselves. And yet Coates is baffled by them and realized that in the past he would have treated them as inferior, but that's the same way he feels when he sees the news and sees that the criminal injustice in America. So it's interesting that even though they're experiencing the same sort of fear of their identity, he would have treated them as inferior in the past. But the thing that changes the person that changes his perspective is a woman he meets at the university that he falls in love with, and she teaches him a new way to love, and she shows him that like love has many different forms, and that love doesn't have to be this hard thing. Love is abstract, but it's also a soft thing, and the softness that comes with love is an act of heroism. So once we get to know each other, we can all realize that we all have felt that same sort of fear, but what do we do with this like newfound understanding? When the author ends up having a child of his own, he tries to find a balance between love and fear, and he realizes that this fear stems from the lack of change in America, just in the way that Black Americans are treated in society. And there's just a lot of racial injustice that still remains throughout America. So this fear must also remain with him. And although as we move towards equality, it is understood that fear can guide our lives, but love can overcome any powers of fear. But for this, we need societal change as well. So the big question I got from the book was, how do we push for societal change without indirectly hurting others in the process? Because that's something that can happen when we think we're doing a good thing. It can indirectly hurt so many other people in the process, and we need to understand everyone's perspective and how we can collaborate and move forward together and not move forward in a way that just benefits one group of people, like it has been throughout history, I suppose. So then, when I thought about it, this book is important to me because I do want to study psychology when I go to college, and I know that our emotions stem from a part of our brain called the amygdala, and this is a very important part of our brain that we can't always consciously control. I know we all feel like that. Sometimes we can't control our emotions, and that's actually backed up by a lot of psychological research that we know about. And I think it's important to understand how our brains work in a subconscious way so that we don't place blame on just our conscious or on our conscious selves, because that's just unfair because we don't fully understand how our brains work at all these different levels and how, like, the mechanics behind our brain. So we can't just blame ourselves and our consciousness because there's so many other things going on. And also, our brains have plasticity, which means they can respond to our surrounding environments, and our environments can greatly influence our outlook on the world and the decisions we make. And that's another subconscious thing because what we experience, because we're not necessarily conscious, because we're not necessarily like in control of the environment that we're in, and therefore we're not in control of like maybe the way we respond to certain situations because of our upbringing. But there are things we can do, but it's important because race is still like a big issue in our country and our world, and I've seen firsthand how race can influence the way that you're perceived and the things that others say about you. And I think it's important that racial inequity must be solved. And one way to understand why we act the way we do is psychology. And I hope to participate in psychological research of my own one day. And I want to use whatever newfound knowledge we discover to make changes in our society. But of course, this is already happening, and it's not going to happen by one person. It's a group effort. And this doesn't have to happen through psychology. It's already happening through literature. And we learn from reading these books and other people's experiences. So having books like Between the World and Me are catalysts for societal change. And it's important that we all learn about someone else's perspective, because we might realize that we might have a lot more in common with them than we initially thought. So, yeah. Thank you. Bye.